Everyone, this is Cindy, and I am going through the fourth article in the Entity and Language series, which is called Translation and Language APIs Impact on Query Understanding and Entity Understanding. So in this article, which is the fourth in the five-part series, we really dive into how all of the different translation, localization, and language APIs work together to help Google understand the linguistic context of a search query. And this is important because we know that Google is focusing a lot more on language. They've just done a major overhaul to the Translate interface, and they've launched direct translation all throughout the Google Android OS. So that you can translate things on the fly just by clicking on them in many cases. So that's very cool. Clearly, they care a lot about language. And again, we think this matters because we believe that mobile-first indexing is really entity-first indexing, organization of Google's index based on language-agnostic entities instead of URLs and language-specific indicators or region-specific indicators as well. So in this article, we give you a really awesome diagram of how our research shows Google is using all of the APIs together. And this includes using the translation API to detect what language a query is in, and then if it's in a language that's understood directly by Google, which is one of the 10 languages currently supported by the Cloud Natural Language API, then Google uses a broad match style functionality to find entity understanding or entity matches, which often result in a knowledge graph style result. If they determine that the query is in a language that is not one that's supported by the Google Cloud Natural Language API, then they use the translation API to translate the query to English, and then they look for an exact match for entity understanding. If there's an exact match in the English translation of the query, then they'll show the entity result, the knowledge graph, in the query. If there's not an exact match, then they revert to, from what we can tell, non-entity understanding style results, or at least less sophisticated, less entity-oriented results. So the way you can think of this happening is for some specific query that's translated that's a movie name, for instance. If someone searches in a language for a specific movie name, like The Grinch That Stole Christmas, then Google will translate that to English if they're searching in a language that's not supported by the Cloud Natural Language API. Google will take their query, translate it to English, and as long as the translation is good, Google will say, okay, we have a match, you're searching for this particular movie, and they'll show you The Grinch That Stole Christmas and knowledge graph, or they might disambiguate between the two versions of the movie or the movie and the book. But they'll say, okay, we have a match. If, on the other hand, they don't find an exact match, that could be for a number of reasons. That could be because something's not quite right in the translation API. And so you might be able to change the way you're ranking or change the situation by influencing the translation API by giving feedback about how words in that particular language are interpreted by the Google Translate API. Or it could be that it just doesn't have entity understanding for that particular thing, concept, idea, whatever, yet. And so what happens in those cases is you don't get the knowledge graph, you don't get entity understanding. So we have a really great diagram that we worked really hard to explain this and how the different paths and the different requests that happen all throughout a query to understand or to show how Google knows what language you're searching in and how Google responds in terms of finding entities to show as knowledge graph results that either are a broad match if it's a language that is understood by Google Cloud Natural Language API, or entities that are exact match to the English translation if it's determined that the query is in a language that is not supported by the Cloud Natural Language API. We did a lot of research to prove this out, and we hope that you'll like the article. So again, this is the fourth article in the Entity and Language series called Translation and Language API's Impact on Query Understanding and Entity Understanding. Thanks.